A teen took a photo of a waiter's burn scars until his father saw the veteran's tattoo. Daniel Morgan, 38, had served as a combat medic during the Fallujah campaign 5 years ago. He'd been severely burned while pulling a fellow soldier from a Humvee engulfed in flames after an IED strike. The explosion had left half his face and neck permanently scarred, a roadmap of pain etched into his skin. After his medical discharge, Daniel retreated from military life, avoiding veterans groups and reunions that might have provided support. He settled in a quiet riverside town, far from anyone who might recognize him, and took a job as a waiter at Riverside Diner, a small establishment where he could earn an honest living while keeping interactions brief. Each day he endured the stares, the whispers, and the way parents pulled children closer when he approached their tables. He developed a system: approach from the right side, his less scarred side, speak briefly, place dishes carefully, and retreat. Manager Mike had initially hesitated to put Daniel on front-of-house duties, suggesting kitchen work instead. But Daniel had insisted. He refused to hide completely. Emily, a fellow waitress, had noticed Daniel's quiet strength and the way he handled the stares and whispers with dignity. She was intrigued by his past and wanted to know more about him. Emily had her own struggles. She was a single mother raising a young daughter while working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Despite her hardships, she always had a warm smile and a kind word for everyone. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Daniel was carrying a tray of drinks when he heard snickering behind him. A group of teenagers from the local high school were nudging each other, pointing discreetly. One boy, about 16, raised his phone, pretending to take a selfie while actually capturing Daniel's profile. "Check this out," the boy whispered to his friends. "Straight out of a horror movie." Daniel heard every word. His hearing had become more acute since the explosion, as if compensating for his other injuries. He kept walking, his face a careful blank, his grip on the tray steady, despite the familiar burn of humiliation spreading through his chest. At a nearby booth sat Carl Wilson, a retired Army sergeant, having dinner with his teenage son, Alex. Carl was midway through explaining the college application process when he noticed Daniel delivering water to a neighboring table. The waiter's sleeve pulled back slightly as he reached across, revealing the edge of a distinctive tattoo on his forearm. Carl's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That tattoo, a medic's cross intertwined with an unmistakable unit designation, belonged to the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, his unit in Fallujah. His eyes traveled to Daniel's scarred face, seeing beyond the damage to the features beneath. Recognition dawned slowly, then hit like a thunderbolt. "Dad?" Alex asked, noticing his father's sudden stillness. "What's wrong?" Carl watched as his son and friends continued snickering at Daniel's expense, taking another photo when the waiter turned away. Without a word, Carl reached across the table and firmly gripped his son's wrist, forcing the phone down. "Alex," he said, his voice low and deadly serious, "you just did the worst thing I've ever seen you do." The boy's smile faltered. "It's just a picture, Dad, for laughs." Carl's gaze never left Daniel's retreating form. "That man isn't what you think, not even close. If you believe a good person deserves to be remembered, stay here with us." Carl Wilson had served 18 years before retiring to civilian life. He'd been a platoon sergeant during the same Fallujah operations where Daniel had served as a combat medic. Though they'd been in different companies, Carl knew the stories. Everyone did. They'd called him the doc who carried 4 men through enemy fire. They'd called him a young medic who, despite suffering severe burns when their transport was hit, had returned to the burning vehicle repeatedly to extract injured Marines. The last man he'd pulled out had been Lieutenant James Wilson, Carl's eldest son. James had survived because of that medic, though he still walked with a limp. And now, incredibly, the same man was clearing tables at a small-town diner while teenagers mocked his scars. "Alex, give me your phone," Carl demanded. his tone leaving no room for argument. "Dad, what's the big deal? We were just—" Alex reluctantly handed over his phone. Carl deleted the photos, then stood abruptly. "Stay here," he instructed his son, then approached the manager's station where a balding man in his 50s was reviewing receipts. "Excuse me," Carl said. "The waiter with the burn scars? Could I speak with him privately?" The manager, Mike, looked uncomfortable. "Daniel's on shift right now. Is there a problem with your service?" "No problem. I need to thank him for something that happened a long time ago." Mike disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a frown. "He says he doesn't want to speak with anyone. He's private about his past." Carl nodded, understanding. Men who'd seen what Daniel had often preferred, anonymity to recognition. He scribbled his name and number on a napkin. "Please give him this. Tell him it's from Lieutenant Wilson's father. He'll understand." That evening, Carl sat at his computer staring at the blank comment box of a private Facebook group for veterans of the Iraq campaigns. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he began typing. "Today I saw a hero being mocked while wearing a waiter's uniform. The doc who saved my son and others during Operation Phantom Fury is serving meals in my hometown, enduring ridicule for the scars he earned saving Marines' lives. What have we become when we fail to recognize the cost of service when it's standing right in front of us?" By midnight, the post had been shared 197 times across veteran networks. By morning, it had reached several thousand veterans and military families across 3 states. Meanwhile, Alex's friends had posted their own photos of Daniel online with mocking captions, unaware of the growing storm. Within hours, their post was flooded with comments from veterans and active duty service members demanding the images be removed and apologies issued. "That's combat medic Daniel Morgan," wrote one commentator. "You're disrespecting a man who saved more lives in one day than you'll probably impact in your lifetime." Daniel remained unaware of the brewing situation. He worked his Sunday morning shift, keeping his head down as always, but something had changed. Customers were watching him differently, with recognition rather than revulsion in their eyes. Emily noticed the change too. She approached Daniel during a break, her eyes filled with concern. "Daniel, what's going on? People are looking at you differently today." Daniel shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know, Emily. Maybe they finally got used to the scars." Emily placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's more than that, Daniel. Something's happening. Let me help you." Late Sunday afternoon, a letter arrived at the diner, addressed simply to Doc Morgan. Inside was a handwritten note. "You carried me 2 kilometers under enemy fire when both my legs were shattered. If you're washing dishes, I'll gladly mop floors. Some debts can never be repaid. A grateful Marine." The manager placed the letter on the break room table, his understanding of his quiet employee transforming with each passing hour. Monday morning brought an unprecedented sight to Riverside Diner. By 7 a.m., a dozen men and women in military dress uniforms were seated throughout the restaurant. They came in quietly, took various tables, and each placed a small card, reading, "Thank you for your service, Doc, a fellow veteran." Daniel was overwhelmed by the support. He looked around the diner, his eyes meeting Emily's. She smiled at him, her eyes filled with pride and admiration. By 8 a.m., the number had doubled. The diner, typically quiet on Monday mornings, hummed with the presence of Marines, Army, and Navy personnel, all sitting with perfect posture, speaking in respectful tones, waiting. Daniel arrived for his shift at 8:30, unaware of what awaited him. He paused at the entrance, taking in the sea of uniforms. His first instinct was to retreat, to walk out and never return to the unwanted attention. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Mike approached nervously. "Daniel, these people, they're here for you. I didn't know." His voice caught. "I didn't know who you were." Daniel moved mechanically to the break room, donned his apron, and began his routine. His hands trembled slightly as he filled water glasses, but his face remained composed as he approached the first table of Marines. A gunnery sergeant rose to his feet and snapped a perfect salute. "Doc Morgan," he said, his voice carrying in the now silent diner. "Thank you for not leaving anyone behind that night." Daniel stood frozen, water pitcher gripped tightly. The sergeant extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Daniel shook it. One by one, the veterans approached. Some introduced themselves as members of units he'd served alongside. Others were simply fellow veterans showing solidarity. A woman in navy dress blues handed him a small box containing a Purple Heart. "My father's," she explained. He'd been one of the men Daniel had saved, though he'd passed away last year from complications related to his injuries. "He made me promise to return this to you," she said softly. "He said it belonged to the real hero of Fallujah." By mid-morning, local news crews had gathered outside. Mike, who just days ago had suggested Daniel work fewer front-of-house shifts because his appearance made some customers uncomfortable, now stood before cameras, declaring how honored the diner was to employ such a hero. Carl Wilson arrived with both his sons, Alex and Lieutenant James Wilson. The latter walked with a pronounced limp as he made his way directly to Daniel. "You probably don't remember me," James began. "Third vehicle in the convoy," Daniel replied quietly. "Fractured femur and shrapnel wounds to the lower back. You kept trying to stand up, even with your leg broken." The two men embraced while cameras captured the moment. James turned to his younger brother. "Alex has something to say to you." The teenager who had photographed Daniel for mockery now stood before him, face flushed with shame. "I'm sorry," he said, voice barely audible. "I didn't know. I was stupid and cruel." "There's no excuse." Daniel studied the boy's face. "I forgive you," he said simply. "Just remember, no one chooses how they get wounded, but we all choose how we treat each other afterward." By afternoon, the viral photos had been replaced with new images. Daniel surrounded by veterans, Daniel shaking hands with James Wilson, Daniel continuing to serve tables despite the commotion, his quiet dignity evident in every movement. Mike approached him during a lull. "Daniel, I need to apologize. When customers complained about your appearance, I should have stood up for you instead. I asked you to work less visible shifts. I was wrong." Daniel accepted the apology with a nod before closing time. Mike hung a newly printed sign beside the diner entrance. "Proud to have American heroes on our staff. Medal of Honor nominee, Daniel Morgan, serves here." As Daniel cleaned tables that evening, Carl Wilson lingered, waiting until they were relatively alone. "Why here?" he asked simply. "With your record, you could have any number of positions working with veterans or in military liaison roles." Daniel considered the question carefully. "Because here, I'm just Daniel, not a sad story, not a recruitment poster, not a reminder of the worst day of anyone's life." He paused. "Or at least I was." Carl nodded in understanding. Sometimes the weight of heroism was heavier than civilians could comprehend. The next morning, Riverside Diner opened to a line of customers stretching around the block. Veterans, military families, and community members waited patiently for a chance to shake Daniel's hand or simply be served by him. The local teenagers who had mocked him were there too, quietly passing out flyers for a fundraiser supporting wounded warriors. Have you ever made the right choice when everyone else walked away? Your story matters too, the flyers read. 1 month later, Daniel received an official letter from the Pentagon inviting him to a ceremony honoring battlefield medics. The letter mentioned the possibility of formally awarding the Medal of Honor that had been recommended years ago but delayed due to administrative complications. Daniel folded the letter and placed it in his locker at the diner. He had no intention of attending the recognition. While appreciated, it felt at odds with the quiet life he'd built for himself. "You're not going?" Mike asked when Daniel mentioned declining the invitation. "I'm fine right here," Daniel replied. "I don't need medals or ceremonies. I just need normal days where people see me, not just my scars or my past." The diner had changed in subtle ways. Customers who had once requested different servers now specifically asked for Daniel's section. Veterans still came regularly, but they respected his preference for normality, treating him as Daniel the waiter rather than Doc, the war hero. One Tuesday morning, Daniel found a handwritten card placed carefully on his usual break room chair. It read simply, "Your scars are medals we cannot wear for you." It wasn't signed, but he recognized Alex Wilson's handwriting. Looking through the service window, he saw Alex and several classmates seated in the dining area. Instead of phones raised to capture his disfigurement, they had notebooks open, carefully taking notes as an off-duty paramedic demonstrated basic first aid techniques. Mike had donated the space for weekly first aid classes, inspired by Daniel. "Service seems like the least we could do," he explained with a shrug. Daniel watched the teenagers practice tourniquets and pressure bandages, the same techniques he'd used under fire. The sight stirred something long dormant within him. Perhaps there was value in being visible after all, scars and all. Honor doesn't reside in medals or uniforms. It lives in those who carry wounds yet harbor no hatred. And sometimes a quiet man, clearing tables, once held the power of life and death in his hands, preserving the final breaths of an entire platoon. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel and Emily grew closer. They spent their breaks together, sharing stories and laughter. Emily's warmth and kindness began to thaw Daniel's reserved demeanor. He found himself opening up to her, sharing bits of his past that he'd kept hidden for so long. One evening after their shift, Emily invited Daniel to her apartment for dinner. Her daughter, Lily, greeted Daniel with a hug, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy says you're a hero," she said, looking up at him. Daniel smiled, his scarred face softening. "Your mommy is the real hero, Lily. She works hard to take care of you." Emily blushed, her heart swelling with love for this man who had been through so much, yet remained so humble. As they sat down to eat, Emily looked at Daniel with a soft smile. "You know, Daniel, you've changed so much since you first started here. You've inspired not just me, but the whole community." Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "It's because of you, Emily. You saw past my scars and gave me a chance to be more than just a waiter." Emily reached across the table and took his hand. "You've always been more than just a waiter, Daniel. You're a hero, and you deserve to be recognized for it." The impact of Daniel's presence in Riverside continued to grow. The first aid classes, inspired by him, became a weekly event, drawing in more and more participants. Veterans, military families, and community members all came together to learn life-saving skills, inspired by Daniel's story. The diner became a hub of activity, with people from all walks of life coming to show their support. The local teenagers who had once mocked Daniel now looked up to him, seeing him as a role model. They volunteered their time to help with the classes and other community initiatives. One day, a local reporter approached Daniel for an interview. "Your story has inspired so many people," she said. "Would you be willing to share it with a wider audience?" Daniel looked at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. "I think it's time, Daniel. Your story deserves to be heard." Daniel agreed, and the interview was published in the local newspaper. It quickly gained traction, spreading to national news outlets. Daniel's story of courage, resilience, and humility touched the hearts of people across the country. As Daniel's story spread, he found himself reflecting on his journey. He realized that he had found a new purpose in life, one that went beyond his past as a combat medic. He was now a symbol of hope and inspiration for his community. One evening, as he sat with Emily on the banks of the river, he looked out at the water and said, "You know, I never thought I'd find peace after what happened in Fallujah. But here, with you and this community, I've found something more valuable than any medal or ceremony." Emily smiled and took his hand. "You've found a place where you belong, Daniel, and you've inspired so many people along the way." Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with love. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emily. You've been my rock, my support, and my inspiration." Emily blushed and leaned in to kiss him. As they sat there watching the sunset, they knew that they had found something special, a love that transcended their pasts and a future filled with hope and possibility. A year later, Daniel and Emily stood together in the newly renovated Riverside Community Center. The center, funded by donations from the community and veterans organizations, was a testament to the impact of Daniel's story. It housed classrooms for first aid training, support groups for veterans, and a memorial wall honoring the heroes of Fallujah. As they cut the ribbon to officially open the center, Daniel looked at Emily with a smile. "We did it," he said, "together." Emily smiled back, her eyes filled with pride. "Together," she agreed. As they walked into the center, hand in hand, they knew that they had not only found love, but also a purpose that would continue to inspire and heal their community for years to come. Thank you for joining. A teen took a photo of a waiter's burn scars until his father saw the veteran's tattoo. If you enjoyed this heartwarming journey of love, redemption, and second chances, please show your support. Like this story if it touched your heart. Share it with friends and family who love a good romance. Subscribe to stay updated with more captivating stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more emotional and engaging tales.